What if a single chemical could instantly hijack the complex network inside your head and completely rewrite how you experience reality? Some substances make your heart race and convince your mind you are invincible. Others slow everything down until even breathing feels optional. Some twist your senses so radically that time itself seems to stretch and break. Today, we break down the world's most common drugs, examine how they rewire your brain chemistry, and trace what happens from the very first dose to the final crash. We start with the most widely consumed drug on Earth. Caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant, naturally found in coffee beans, tea leaves, and cacao pods. To understand how it works, think of your brain as having a built-in brake pedal. Throughout the day, a chemical called adenosine quietly accumulates in your tissue, binding to specialized receptors to tell your mind it's time to sleep. Every hour you're awake, those brakes are pressed a little harder. Caffeine cheats. Its molecular structure so closely mirrors adenosine, allowing it to slip straight into those SAMA receptors without activating them. It doesn't hit the brakes. It physically blocks your brain from touching them. Within 15 to 30 minutes, caffeine crosses the blood-brain barrier. You feel a subtle rise in alertness and a sharpening of focus. At its peak around 45 minutes, caffeine triggers a secondary release of adrenaline and dopamine. Your heart rate rises, your pupils dilate, and you feel a wave of motivation. Here's the twist. Caffeine doesn't create new energy. It simply postpones exhaustion. The average half-life of caffeine is about 5 hours. That late afternoon espresso? Half of its chemical payload is still firing in your head when your pillow hits the mattress at night. As your liver finally metabolizes the drug, the massive wave of adenosine that built up outside those blocked receptors suddenly floods in all at once. The result is the classic afternoon crash, leaving you suddenly exhausted, irritable, and foggy. Over time, your brain compensates by growing entirely new adenosine receptors. Soon, you need caffeine just to reach baseline. Without it, acute withdrawal kicks in with throbbing headaches and fatigue. Caffeine never eliminates tiredness. It simply silences the alarm until the bill comes due. 1 of 8. Next is nicotine, an exceptionally potent stimulant found naturally in the leaves of the tobacco plant. People absorb it by smoking, vaping, or using oral pouches. 10 seconds. That's all it takes. By the time you've exhaled your first puff, nicotine has already crossed into your brain. It immediately locks onto nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, the molecular switches involved in attention and muscle movement. This binding forces a rapid artificial cascade of dopamine in the brain's reward center. You feel a sudden head rush accompanied by a transient feeling of calm and heightened focus. Your heart rate spikes and your blood vessels constrict almost instantly. Now, things become dangerous. The peak is brief, and as nicotine levels plummet 20 minutes later, the comedown strikes fast. It triggers an immediate spike in anxiety, restlessness, and a chemical craving for another hit. Nicotine rewires the brain's priority pathways faster than almost any other substance, making it as addictively magnetic as heroin. The brain rapidly downregulates its natural receptors, meaning you now require nicotine just to feel normal. Over time, nicotine damages the cardiovascular system, hardens arterial walls, and impairs lung capacity. Nicotine sells brief relief from the exact tension it creates. Moving from stimulants to depressants, alcohol, chemically known as ethanol, is a central nervous system depressant produced through the fermentation of sugars by yeast. Think of your brain as an orchestra balancing two major signals, an accelerator chemical called glutamate and a biological brake pedal called GABA. Alcohol acts like a neurochemical blunt instrument. It cranks down the accelerator while simultaneously slamming its foot on the GABA brake. As blood alcohol levels rise, the initial onset produces warmth, relaxation, and lowered social inhibition because the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive filter, is the first area to slow down. Here's where everything changes. As consumption continues, speech slurs, coordination breaks down, and emotional volatility surges. At higher doses, memory formation halts entirely. The brain loses its ability to transfer short-term experiences into long-term storage, creating a blackout. You are awake, but the recorder has been unplugged. A common myth claims a hot cup of coffee or a cold shower will sober you up. It won't. Your liver can only process roughly 1 standard drink per hour, and no trick on earth can speed up that enzyme timeline. 2 of 8, the calm down, the hangover. happens as the liver breaks alcohol down into toxic acetaldehyde. You experience dehydration, systemic inflammation, and a sharp surge in anxiety as the brain desperately tries to rebalance its suppressed chemistry. Chronic heavy drinking restructures brain tissue, causes liver cirrhosis, and creates life-threatening withdrawal risks. Alcohol feels like temporary freedom until it slowly steals your control. Cannabis, widely known as marijuana, is a complex psychoactive plant containing over 100 cannabinoids, driven primarily by delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. Your brain already possesses a vast signaling network called the endocannabinoid system, which acts like a delicate internal thermostat for memory, mood, pain, and appetite. THC works by hijacking these exact controls. When smoked, the onset is nearly instant. When eaten as an edible, metabolic processing delays the onset for up to 2 hours. You notice a physical heaviness and an altered perception of time, where minutes stretch out to feel like hours. At its peak, cannabis induces euphoria, heightened appreciation for sound and visuals, and deep muscular relaxation. But here is the strange part. Because THC overactivates the amygdala, the brain's central alarm system, high doses scans suddenly flip the experience from profound calm to intense paranoia and racing panic. Remarkably, synthetic THC concentrates today can reach purity levels above 90%, compared to the 3% to 5% potency common in the 1970s. This dramatic increase in potency significantly elevates the risk of adverse mental reactions. As the effects fade during the comedown, users encounter lethargy, dry mouth, and severe brain fog. While physical addiction is lower than with other substances, psychological dependence is common. Heavy long-term use, especially during adolescence, is linked to memory deficits, reduced processing speed, and an increased risk of triggering latent psychotic conditions in predisposed minds. Cannabis offers an altered lens on reality, but using it too often can blur your clarity when thelins is removed. Cocaine is a fast-acting, high-intensity stimulant derived from the leaves of the South American coca plant, processed into a white powder or crystalline rock. Imagine your brain rewarding you with dopamine after a successful task. Normally, once the message is delivered, specialized molecular vacuums, called transporters, instantly suck the dopamine back up to be recycled. Cocaine locks those collection boxes. It blocks the transporters completely, trapping dopamine in the gaps between your brain cells. The payment never stops arriving. Dopamine accumulates to unnatural levels, flooding your reward pathways. 3 of 8. When snorted or smoked, the onset brings an instant rush of intense euphoria, supreme confidence, and boundless energy. Your heart rate and blood pressure soar as your appetite completely vanishes. The catch? The peak is notoriously brief, often lasting less than 30 minutes. The comedown is a sudden, terrifying crash. As trapped dopamine breaks down and vanishes, your brain is left completely bankrupt, far below baseline. You are plunged into paranoia, deep depression, and an overwhelming chemical craving to redose immediately. In fact, animal studies show that when given unlimited access to cocaine, subjects will repeatedly choose the drug over food until they starve. The addiction potential is extreme because the brain rapidly learns to value the drug over basic human survival. Long-term use destroys nasal tissue, severely damages the heart, and impairs your natural ability to feel joy without the substance. Cocaine sells an illusion of power that leaves your chemistry bankrupt when it leaves. MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy or Molly, is a synthetic psychoactive compound that acts as both a stimulant and an empathogen. While most drugs trickle neurotransmitters into your synapses, MDMA forces a massive, sudden release of your brain's entire stored reserve of serotonin, the chemical responsible for mood, empathy, and social connection. It opens the neurochemical floodgates all at once. 30 to 45 minutes after ingestion, the onset begins with a warm rush in the chest and tingling sensations. At its peak, lasting 3 to 6 hours, fear and social anxiety vanish completely, replaced by overwhelming empathy, deep emotional warmth, and heightened sensory awareness. Almost nobody realizes what happens 2 days later, because your stored serotonin reserves were completely emptied in a single night. The comedown leads to a severe emotional crash, often called Suicide Tuesday. For days, users experience profound sadness, fatigue, and mental emptiness, while the brain slowly manufactures new serotonin from scratch. Neuroimaging reveals that taking high doses of MDMA in quick succession can temporarily strip serotonin axon terminals in the brain, leaving pathways visually bare for months. Frequent use can permanently damage these serotonin neurons, leading to persistent clinical depression and sleep disorders. MDMA borrows days of joy from your future to pack them into a single night. Amphetamines and methamphetamine are exceptionally potent synthetic stimulants. Will prescription amphetamines like Adderall are engineered to treat conditions like ADHD. Methamphetamine is a chemically altered variant that destroys brain tissue far more aggressively. 4 of 8. To understand the difference, imagine standard amphetamines forcing brain cells to leak dopamine continuously. Methamphetamine goes further. Its unique chemical structure allows it to slide through the brain's protective barriers in massive amounts while simultaneously blocking breakdown enzymes. The onset brings an immediate, overwhelming rush of energy, hyperfocus, and invincibility. At its peak, which can last up to 24 hours, fatigue disappears entirely. Your brain wasn't designed for this level of stimulation. High doses quickly cross into extreme agitation, involuntary physical twitching, severe paranoia, and auditory hallucinations. The comedown involves catastrophic physical exhaustion, deep depression, and intense aggression. A single high dose of methamphetamine can trigger a dopamine release up to 10 times greater than the natural maximum your brain produces during its most rewarding natural experiences. Addiction is extraordinarily fast because this artificial surge rewires core survival instincts. Long-term use strips dopamine receptors from the brain, leads to severe dental decay, and can induce permanent delusional psychosis. Methamphetamine promises endless fuel, but it burns down the engine to generate it. Opioids represent a class of substances ranging from natural opiates like morphine, to semi-synthetics like heroin, to fully synthetic chemicals like fentanyl. Your body has an internal emergency system designed to manage extreme pain using natural endorphins. Opioids bind directly to these same receptors across the brain and spinal cord, completely blocking pain signals from reaching your consciousness while releasing a massive flood of dopamine. The onset produces a wave of physical relief followed by a heavy, enveloping warmth and absolute emotional safety. Pain disappears entirely, replaced by a dreamy state where you drift on the edge of consciousness. Breathing slows down and digestion decelerates. This is where the trap closes. As the drug leaves your system, the comedown brings a brutal rebound of pain, extreme restlessness, cold sweats, and overwhelming panic. Opioids carry an exceptionally high rate of physical dependence. Your brain quickly halts its own endorphin production, meaning you eventually require the drug just to avoid agonizing physical withdrawal. Fentanyl, a fully synthetic opioid, is roughly 50 times more potent than heroin, a lethal dose so unimaginably small, just 2 milligrams, that it can fit on the tip of a pencil. Overdose occurs when the substance completely silences the brainstem's automatic breathing control, causing respiratory arrest. 5 of 8. Opioids promise total protection from pain but eventually make existence without them unbearable. Benzodiazepines, such as Xanax and Valium, are synthetic depressants engineered as prescription sedatives. Instead of forcing artificial signals, benzodiazepines act like a volume knob on your brain's primary calming chemical, GABA. They bind to GABA receptors and make them dramatically more sensitive, turning down the operational volume of your entire central nervous system. Within 30 minutes, physical tension vanishes, racing thoughts slow to a crawl, and severe anxiety drops away. But here's the catch. At higher doses, this calm rapidly turns into confusion, loss of motor control, and total memory blackout. When the drug wears off, rebound anxiety returns with far greater intensity than before the dose was taken. Benzodiazepines carry a severe risk of physical dependence. In fact, alongside alcohol, benzodiazepines are among the very few drug classes where abrupt withdrawal can be physically fatal. Stopping prolonged use suddenly can trigger uncontrolled panic attacks, hallucinations, and lethal seizures as the unsuppressed brain surges into overdrive. Benzodiazepines turn down the volume on mental distress, but over time, they silence the brain's ability to soothe itself. Psilocybin is a naturally occurring psychedelic compound found in over 200 species of fungi, commonly known as magic mushrooms. Once ingested, your liver converts psilocybin into psilocin, which closely mirrors serotonin. It binds to serotonin receptors in the prefrontal cortex and temporarily disables a key brain network called the default mode network. Imagine the conductor stepping away from a grand orchestra. The musicians keep playing, but without central direction. Instruments that never interacted before start improvising together. 30 to 60 minutes in, visual perceptions shift, colors brighten, and textures pulse. At its peak, lasting 4 to 6 hours, users experience vivid visual patterns, deep emotional insights, and ego dissolution, where the boundary between yourself and the outside world completely dissolves. Clinical trials at major universities have shown that a single guided psilocybin session can produce immediate, lasting reductions in treatment-resistant depression that persist for 6 months or longer. The calm-down is gradual, leaving a reflective mental state known as an afterglow. Psilocybin has virtually no physical addiction potential, as the brain builds immediate, 6 of 8, short-term tolerance to the compound. However, a chaotic setting can trigger a terrifying panic response known as a bad trip. Psilocybin does not add new visions to your mind. It temporarily rearranges how your brain interprets itself. LSD is an extraordinarily potent synthetic psychedelic, originally derived from a fungus that grows on rye grains. It is active in microscopic microgram quantities, typically taken via absorbent paper blotters. Think about how small a microgram is. 1 single gram of pure LSD contains enough actividoses for 10,000 people. Like psilocybin, LSD targets serotonin receptors, but with a unique twist. The LSD molecule becomes physically trapped inside the receptor's binding pocket for hours, causing continuous, relentless signaling. The onset brings an electric sensation of anticipation. At its peak, lasting 8 to 12 hours, perception undergoes radical transformation. Users experience complex visual hallucinations and synesthesia, a rare sensory crossover where you might see a sound or feel a color. The calm-down is drawn out over several hours, leaving the body exhausted and the mind unable to sleep until the molecule finally detaches. LSD carries no physical addiction potential, but the risk of a prolonged, terrifying psychological experience is real. LSD pulls back the curtain on ordinary perception, forcing the brain to process more raw data than it was built to handle at once. Ketamine is a synthetic dissociative anesthetic developed for medical and veterinary surgery. Ketamine works through a completely distinct pathway by blocking NMDA receptors, which stops glutamate, the brain's primary excitatory messenger, from delivering signals. By severing this communication, ketamine effectively disconnects your conscious mind from the sensory inputs of your physical body. Within minutes, you feel a sensation of floating and total physical numbness. At lower doses, it causes mild detachment. At higher doses, users enter what is known as the K-hole, a state of complete dissociation where you lose all awareness of your physical body, identity, and surroundings. Remarkably, at specific subanesthetic doses, ketamine can trigger rapid dendritic spine growth in damaged brain cells within hours, sparking a revolutionary new wave of psychiatric treatments for clinical depression. The comedown takes 1 to 2 hours as sensory signals gradually reconnect. Ketamine carries moderate to high psychological addiction potential as an escape mechanism. Chronic heavy use causes severe, irreversible damage to the urinary tract and kidney function. 7 of 8. Ketamine cuts the wire between your conscious awareness and your physical body. Every drug begins by borrowing chemistry your brain already owns. Some borrow your focus. Some borrow your confidence. Some borrow your happiness. Some even borrow your sense of reality. But every loan comes with interest. Sometimes it's paid back with a headache. Sometimes with anxiety. Sometimes with addiction. And sometimes with years your brain never fully gets back. The chemicals are different. The mechanisms are different. But the lesson never changes. Your brain is already one of the most complex systems in the known universe. Changing its chemistry is never as simple as changing how you feel. 8 of 8.